Alright, so essentially I'm recording this just in case. So methods used to study consciousness. So essentially what you need to know is about the different methods in which we actually measure physiological responses, and they're usually measuring from brainwave patterns, muscle activity, and eye movements. So measurement of physiological responses, the electroencephalograph. Now the electroencephalograph is all to do with the brain. So an electroencephalograph, or EEG, is a device that detects, amplifies and records general patterns of electrical activity of the brain over a period of time. The EEG records are called electroencephalograms, which is weird because for some reason they think that a graph wouldn't. Anyway. So brainwave patterns shown in EEG recordings vary in frequency and amplitude. Frequency refers to the number of brainwave patterns, brainwaves per second. So if the pattern of high frequency brainwave activity is faster and therefore has more brainwaves per unit of time. A pattern of low frequency brain activity is slower and therefore has fewer brainwaves per unit of time. So please note, you must mention DARE when you write down any physiological measurement of consciousness. So your sentence for the electroencephalograph, or the EEG, should be detects, amplifies and records electrical activity of the brain. So with the new VCAR changes, they still expect you to know the measurements of physiological responses. So you need to know DARE. Make sure you remember it. Alright, so another physiological response measurement is, continues on with the electroencephalograph. So the amplitude or intensity of brainwaves is measured in microvolts and can be visually judged by the size of the peaks and troughs of the waves from a baseline of zero activity. So if you see in the actual picture there, right, you'll notice that it's got these jumps that go up like that, and then it has smaller ones, right? So the frequency is measuring how far apart they are. The amplitude is how high or low they go. Alright, so it gets difficult now. So beta, alpha, theta and delta brainwave patterns. The new study design that they've made for COVID 2020 is they've removed some of these for sleep. You still need to know the brainwave patterns, but you need to know them in regards to consciousness. So I'm just going to quickly go through each of these, just so you have a baseline understanding of them for later on. So beta is when you're awake. When you're awake and alert, and it has the highest frequency. So you need to know this. You need to know that it's got the highest frequency, right, and the lowest amplitude. So you need to make sure you know the frequencies of these brainwave patterns, right? So delta, and that's not working out. So delta has the lowest amplitude, lowest frequency but highest amplitude. So make sure you highlight those and put them into your notes. And we'll just do that last one. There we go. Alright, so beta brainwave pattern is associated with alertness and intensive mental activity during normal waking consciousness. So essentially, it's when you are pretty much awake and paying attention to your teacher. I'm hoping that you are. Anyway, so beta brainwaves are also present during states of tension, anxiety, threat, fear, and let's ignore this sentence here. So it is not during dreaming, right? That is beta-like. You have to have the words beta-like. But since they've eliminated that, I'm going to ignore that. So the beta pattern comprises of high frequency, fast, and low amplitude small brain waves. Please make sure that you remember that section there. That dot point there is very important. Make sure you remember that one. So highlight it, put it in red, do whatever you need to do. It is the fastest of the waves. So in other words, right now your brain will be showing beta brain waves as you're paying attention to the PowerPoint and alert. But it can also be when you're tense, anxious, threatened, and afraid. Beta-like brainwaves are present when you are dreaming in rapid eye movement sleep. So they're similar to beta, but they're not beta. So alpha brainwaves are when we are awake and alert, but mentally and physically relaxed and internally focused. The EEG shows a predominantly alpha brainwave pattern, and this is when you are calm, this is when you are at home relaxing, and some argue that this is a more conducive environment to actually learning. If you're constantly stressed, it means you're not paying attention. You're better off in an alpha sort of state to learn, but who knows. So typically the alpha pattern is regular or rhythmic rather than irregular or jagged in appearance, with medium to relatively high frequency but slower than beta waves, with low amplitude but slightly larger amplitude than beta waves. So remember, amplitude is how high or low they go, but frequency is how close together they are. And you can notice from just this picture down here, right, they're very slow. Think of it like, they're relaxed and they're just going through it, right? They're usually a lot slower, the waves are a lot higher, and that's what you need to remember. So remember, this bit here is the important bit this year, that dot point. So in other words, alpha brainwaves are present when you're awake, but you are not as alert as you normally would be. Alpha brainwave patterns would be present during light meditation, make sure you get that right, daydreaming and relaxation. So for example, Zara has decided that VCE is not for her and spends her entire lesson daydreaming about being a checkout chick for the rest of her life. During this time, Zara's brainwaves would be showing alpha brainwaves. So please make sure you know that that's what they've focused on this year, right? Because they've eliminated other reasons to know the brainwave patterns. Alright, theta brainwaves, or theta, depends on how you want to say it. A predominantly theta brainwave pattern is most commonly produced when we are very drowsy, such as falling asleep, or just before waking. So you may want to just highlight very drowsy, or just before waking. Let's put it in there just in case. They may also be produced when awake and engaged in creative activities, during dreamlike visual imagery, when excited, and when deeply meditating. Please make sure that you're highlighting and note-taking of that one there and the next one as well. So if you're doing art or, you're dancing or something like that, theta brainwaves will come up. If you're deeply meditating and you've almost eliminated all external environment, noise and things like that, right, you would be in theta. If you're, deep in imagination of what's, going on, this would be theta. So theta brainwave has a medium frequency and some high amplitude large waves, mixed with some low amplitude small waves. So look at the pattern again. Look how very, very slow it is. So this is why you can say deeply meditating would be very reminiscent of this. So medium frequency, so they're just there. If it was high frequency, they'd be very, very close together. So medium frequency and some high amplitude, so their waves are huge. And some small ones as well. Alright, so in other words, theta brainwaves are what you experience when you are falling asleep, when you're waking up, when you're being creative, when you're excited, and when in deep meditation. Make sure you know the difference between what brainwaves you'll be in when you're in light meditation and deep meditation. Alpha in light and theta in deep. Alright, delta brainwaves are usually to do with sleep. I'm going to teach it anyway, just in case. So they begin to appear in stage 3 of non-rapid eye movement sleep. In stage 4, during which we experience a deeper sleep, there is predominantly delta brainwave patterns. The delta waves have a pattern of low frequency, slow, and high, large amplitude. They're very slow and the slowest of all the brainwaves. And that's because you're not as aware and alert to everything else that's going around you. It's the least alert out of all of them. So please highlight this particular dot point here. Alright, so in other words, delta brainwaves are present only when in deep sleep. And there is some argument against it, but let's go with it. So deep sleep starts in NREM stage 3 and continues into stage 4 NREM sleep. So why do we look at brainwave patterns? So brainwaves patterns are used in conjunction with other physiological or psychological measures to help identify and describe an individual's level of alertness and the associated state of consciousness. So make sure to highlight that bit there. So it explains why we look at the brainwaves. The EEG is useful in providing general or overall information about brain activity in real time without being invasive. The EEG is also widely used to assist in the diagnosis and study of various brain-related medical conditions and is quite important for epilepsy and where you've got uncontrollable bursts of activity. So the limitation of the EEG is that it poorly measures neural activity that occurs below the outer layer of the brain. Nor does it provide detailed information about which particular structures of the brain are activated or what their specific functions might be, especially areas beneath the cortex. Essentially, all it's measuring is the brainwave patterns, right? So that's a limitation. It doesn't go deep enough. It doesn't try to explain anything else. It just goes, all right, which brainwave pattern are you in at the time? That's all it's doing. All right, I would probably put this particular picture or diagram into your notes because it does give a good representation of what it is. If you happen to look at the different brainwaves, you can see delta is quite different. Theta, your deep meditation, it's starting to get a little bit wider there, but still. All right. So brainwave patterns due to drug-induced altered states of consciousness. So if you happen to be on drugs, you are in an ASC. Same sort of thing with alcohol. So a drug is any substance that can change a person's physical and or mental functioning. Certain types of drugs can induce an altered state of consciousness and changes in brainwave patterns. Two broad categories of drugs that can initiate changes are called stimulants and depressants. So you may have learned a lot about this in health at some point. So depressants are your alcohol, your marijuana, your heroin, your Vicodin. It's very hard to get. Anyway, stimulants would be your cocaine, your Adderall, your Ritalin, your ecstasy. So depressants are exactly how they sound. They're there to not make you sad, but they're there to lower the nervous system functioning. Stimulants increase it. Alrighty, so put this figure into your note because it does sort of give a good overview. So brainwave patterns due to drug-induced altered states of consciousness, stimulants. So stimulants are drugs that increase activity in the central nervous system and the rest of the body. They have an alerting, activating effect. Right? Most of you actually do have quite a lot of stimulants anyway. Chocolate is my personal favorite, but you've got coffee, tea, cola, those energy drinks that are bad for your heart. Don't drink them. I can tell you a wonderful story about me driving at 5 a.m. in the morning and I felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest. It was not good. Don't have them. Alrighty. Drug-induced altered states of consciousness, we're talking about depressants. So depressants are drugs that decrease activity in the central nervous system. Just because it says depressants does not make you sad. It just means that the functioning of your central nervous system has been reduced. Generally, their effects result in a state of calm, relaxation, drowsiness, sleep, or anesthesia as a result of the drug increase. So the doses, as they increase, you're more likely to get more drowsy, more relaxed. They don't make you sad. Well, not necessarily. Some people have different sort of views. I had a friend very depressed as soon as they started taking any kind of depressant. Very sad. Anyway, all reduce alertness, environmental awareness, responsiveness to sensory stimulation, cognitive functioning, and physical activity to some extent. You have a loss of self-control, and it's very common, right? In small doses, and we're talking very small doses, they can make you feel more relaxed and less inhibited. In larger doses, it can cause unconsciousness and even death. Don't do drugs. Barbiturates and benzodiazepines, which is my first personal favourite thing to say, are two major categories of a depressant, drugs used in medications, most commonly to aid sleep and sometimes to alleviate symptoms of anxiety or seizure activity. So this bit here, and I'm just going to, where it says most commonly aid sleep, you'll have doctors in Australia that are very, very reluctant to give you any kind of sleep medication. And the reason for that is because of this particular sentence. In larger doses, they can cause unconsciousness and death, right? You take too many of these and it can cause some serious issues. So if we happen to think about it, right, they'll only give you one or two at a time and that's it. So you need to be very careful with depressants. Because remember, it slows down the nervous system. You don't want that. So in other words, there are two types of drugs that can cause an ASC, altered state of consciousness. Stimulants increase the activity in the central nervous system. So caffeine, cigarettes, chocolate, cocaine, ecstasy. It's that party drug. Of course, you don't know that. Anyway, so depressants decrease the activity in the CNS, so the central nervous system, marijuana and alcohol. Depressants make you more relaxed and less inhibited. Stimulants excite the nervous system and hype you up. For example, Cheyenne needed her stimulant of coffee every Tuesday morning to get through the psychology class. Alright, so remember, DARE. So when you're looking at any physiological measurement, you're using DARE. So electromyograph or EMG is used to detect, amplify, record the electrical activity of muscles. So see how it's got electromyograph and it's got an M there? That's how I tend to remember that it's for the muscles, right? So it's trying to see, how your muscles are contracting or relaxing, right, in certain circumstances. So the EMG recordings generally show the strength of electrical activity occurring in the muscles, which indicates change in muscle activity and muscle tone. The EMG records that there are identifiable changes in muscular activity during certain states of consciousness. For example, when falling asleep, we usually become less and less alert as we drift into deeper stages of sleep. The electromyograph also measures the hypnic jerks. So when you're actually falling asleep, your muscles start to contract and then release. And as you're falling asleep, you'll notice that sometimes your legs just all of a sudden just kick out. And that's called a hypnic jerk, right? It's all to do with the muscles. So as you start to fall asleep, your muscles progressively relax, and there is a distinguishable period when your muscles may spasm or be completely relaxed. So the next one is the electrooculograph. Don't forget DARE. So the electrooculograph, and you should remember that ocular being something to do with the eyes, or EOG, measures eye movements or eye positions by detecting, amplifying, and recording electrical activity in the eye muscles that control eye movements. The EOG is most commonly used to measure changes in eye movements over time during different types and stages of sleep and while dreaming. So EOG is mainly to do with dreaming, and it does sort of look at when you've actually fallen asleep, right? You're in NREM, which stands for non-rapid eye movement. The EOG would measure when you start going into REM, which is rapid eye movement. So it actually measures when you actually fall into the different stages of sleep. So you may want to highlight that one and that one there. I've also said that at the top. So in particular, sleep research studies that have used EOGs have been of immense value in clarifying the distinction between the two different types of sleep, which I just said. Oh my God. I'm going to move on. Alright, please note. So when referring to the EOG, you must state that it detects, amplifies, and records the electrical activity of the muscles surrounding the eye, not the eye itself. You don't get any marks if you say just the eye. So the EOG and the EEG are the most commonly examined topics associated with brainwaves. They always mention it. So the standard questions usually involve how could the use of the electrooculograph show, how could they show when when an individual is in NREM and REM sleep. So in NREM sleep, the electrooculograph would show little to no eye movements. Little to no eye movements in the displayed by the muscles surrounding the eye. That would be good. Whilst in REM sleep, it would show rapid eye movement. So what would an electroencephalograph show when someone is in stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, or stage 4 sleep? They're going to change that question this year, and they're most likely going to be saying what would an electroencephalograph show when someone is in meditation. They're not going to be focusing on the brainwave patterns with sleep, but still. So when answering each of these questions, you must refer to DARE. So don't just write, the electroencephalograph measures the muscles surrounding the eye. You will not get a mark. If you do not say DARE, you won't get a mark. So, and I have had this come up before, you don't just write DARE. You have to actually say it out. Come on, people. Alright, so subjective reporting of consciousness sleep diaries. So remember, subjective is personal experiences and opinions, right? That's subject to bias and not great. Don't do them. But they're helpful in regards to adding to the information that you already have. So subjective reporting involves the use of self-reports. A self-report is the participant's written or spoken responses to the questions, statements or instructions presented by the researcher. Self-reports are considered to be subjective because the data collected from a participant is based on their personal opinion, interpretation, point of view, or judgment. So we might say that I slept really, really well last night, but the reality is it's not really a good measure unless you actually compare it to the brainwave patterns. Alright, sleep diaries, and we'll be getting you to do a sleep diary at some point. So subjective reporting via self-reports is commonly used in the study of sleep. So a sleep diary, sometimes called a sleep log, is commonly used method. So you'll say when you've actually fallen asleep, what time did you wake up in the night, how long were you awake for. I've actually found that the smart watches are pretty good for this. Your phones are pretty good for this, despite the fact that you probably shouldn't be using your phone whilst you are trying to sleep. But sleep diaries do measure the amount of sleep, the type of sleep, how rested you are when waking and falling asleep. Video monitoring is most commonly used in the study of sleep and sleep disturbances or disorders. So when they ask for one of the more reliable methods of physiological responses, right? You would mention the EEG, the EOG, the EMG, that sort of stuff. But video monitoring can also be very helpful because most of the time it is not your subjective experience. It is somebody else's view of you, and they have a lot of data associated with it. You're hooked up to all kinds of things. I've done this and I got kicked out pretty early because I can't sleep in those things. So video monitoring is most commonly used in the study of sleep and sleep disturbances or disorders. So most sleep centres, clinics or laboratories are fitted with one or more video cameras to record externally observable and physiological responses throughout a sleep episode, including behaviours when falling asleep and when waking. So, notes to take away from this lesson. Alright, there are numerous ways in which you can measure consciousness. You've got the electroencephalograph, or EEG, detects, amplifies and records the electrical activity of the brain. The electromyograph, the EMG, detects, amplifies and records the electrical activity of the muscles. The electrooculograph, the EOG, detects, amplifies and records the electrical activity of the muscles surrounding the eye. Highlight that sucker, people. Surrounding the eye. The electrocardiograph, which wasn't really mentioned in this PowerPoint, but the electrocardiograph, the EKG, sometimes the ECG, depends on where you're living. So it detects, amplifies, and records the electrical activity of the heart, which is more commonly associated with pretty much everything else. Sleep journals and video monitoring also measures consciousness. There are stimulants and depressants which can produce an ASC. Stimulants are like your coffee and your caffeine drinks. Depressants are like alcohol and marijuana. And there are 5 different types of brainwaves measured by an EEG. Beta brainwaves are when you're awake and alert. Alpha brainwaves when you're relaxed and in light meditation. Theta brainwaves when you're in deep meditation, falling asleep, waking up, when you're creative, that sort of stuff. Delta brainwaves are stage 3 and stage 4 sleep, and then beta-like brainwaves are REM sleep and dreaming. So I'm going to let you do the exam questions on your own because I'm pretty sure you can do that. And make sure you do the learning activities. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.